Hello everyone and welcome to Word of Mouth. For those of you who do not know, Word of Mouth is an adult story time presented by the Juliet Hampton Morgan Memorial Library. My name is Andrew and today I'll be reading two stories for you, The Bass, the River, and Shelia Mant by W.D. Wetherell, and A Tree, a Rock, a Cloud by Carson McCullers. If you enjoyed today's readings and would like to watch the next program, Word of Mouth is broadcast on the first and third Thursdays of each month at 12:10 p.m. Central Time. You can watch it live through our Juliet Hampton Morgan Memorial Library's Facebook page. That's at MCCPL Morgan. Or you can watch it later on the Montgomery City County Public Library's YouTube page. I believe that's all the announcements I have, so let's begin with our stories. The Bass, the River, and Shelia Mant by W.D. Wetherell. There was a summer in my life when the only creature that seemed lovelier to me than a largemouth bass was Shelia Mant. I was 14. The Mants had rented the cottage next to ours on the river. With their parties, their frantic games of softball, their constant comings and goings, they appeared to me denizens of a brilliant existence. Too noisy by half, my mother quickly decided, but I wouldn't have given anything to be invited to one of their parties, and when my parents went to bed, I would sneak through the woods to their hedge and stare enchanted at the candle-lit swirl of white dresses and bright paisley skirts. Sheila was the middle daughter at 17, all but out of reach. She would spend her days sunbathing on a float my Uncle Siebert had moored in their cove, and before July was over I had learned all of her moods. If she lay flat on the diving board with her hand trailing idly in the water, she was pensive, not to be disturbed. On her side, her head propped up on her arm, she was observant, considering those around her with a look that seemed queenly and severe. Sitting up, arms tucked around her long, sun-tanned legs, she was approachable, but barely, and it was only in those glorious moments when she stretched herself prior to entering the water that her various suitors found the courage to come near. These were many. The Dartmouth heavyweight crew would scull by her house on their way upriver, and I think all 8 of them must have been in love with her at various times during the summer. The coxswain would curse them through his megaphone, but without effect. There was always a pause in their pace when they passed Sheila's float. I suppose to those jaded 20-year-olds she seemed the incarnation of innocence and youth, while to me she appeared utterly suave, the epitome of sophistication. I was on the swim team at school, and to win her attention would do endless laps between my house and the Vermont shore, hoping she would notice the beauty of my flutter kick, the power of my crawl. Finishing, I would boost myself up onto our dock and glance casually over toward her, but she was never watching, and on the miraculous day she was, I immediately climbed the diving board and did my best tuck and a half for her, and continued diving until she had left and the sun went down, and my longing was like a madness and I couldn't stop. It was late August by the time I got up the nerve to ask her out. The tortured will-I-won't-I's, the agonized indecision over what to say, the false starts towards her house and embarrassed retreats. The details of these have been seared from my memory, and the only part I remember clearly is emerging from the woods towards dusk while they were playing softball on their lawn, as bashful and frightened as a unicorn. Sheila was stationed halfway between first and second, well outside of the infield. She didn't seem surprised to see me. As a matter of fact, she didn't seem to see me at all. "If you're playing second base, you should move closer," I said. She turned. I took the full brunt of her long red hair and well-spaced freckles. "I'm playing outfield," she said. "I don't like the responsibility of having a base." "Yeah, I can understand that," I said, though I couldn't. "There's a band in Dixford tomorrow night at 9. Want to go?" One of her brothers sent the ball sailing over the left fielder's head. She stood and watched it disappear toward the river. "You have a car?" she asked, without looking up. I played my masterstroke. "We'll go by canoe." I spent all of the following day polishing it. I turned it upside down on our lawn and scrubbed every inch with Brillo, hosing off the dirt, wiping it with chamois until it gleamed as bright as aluminum ever gleamed. About 5, I slid it into the water, arranging cushions near the bow so Sheila could lean on them if she was in one of her pensive moods. propping up my father's transistor radio by the middle thwart so we could have music when we came back. Automatically, without thinking about it, I mounted my Mitchell reel on my Pfluger spinning rod and stuck it in the stern. I say automatically because I never went anywhere that summer without a fishing rod. When I wasn't swimming laps to impress Sheila, I was out back on our driveway practicing casts. And when I wasn't practicing casts, I was tying the line to Tosca, our Springer Spaniel, to test the reel's drag. And when I wasn't doing any of those things, I was fishing the river for bass. Too nervous to sit at home, I got in the canoe early and started paddling in a huge circle that would get me to Sheila's dock around 8. As automatically as I brought along my rod, I tied on a big Rapala plug, let it down into the water, let out some line, and immediately forgot all about it. It was already dark by the time I glided up to the Mant's dock. Even by day, the river was quiet, most of the summer people preferring Sunapee or one of the other nearby lakes, and at night it was a solitude difficult to believe, a corridor of hidden life that ran between banks like a tunnel. Even the stars were part of it. They weren't as sharp everywhere else. They seemed to have chosen the river as a guide on their slow wheel towards morning, and in the course of the summer's fishing, I had learned all of their names. I was there 10 minutes before Sheila appeared. I heard the slam of their screen door first, then saw her in the spotlight as she came slowly down the path. As beautiful as she was on the float, she was even lovelier now. Her white dress went perfectly with her hair and complemented her figure even more than a swimsuit. It was her face that bothered me. It had on its delightful fullness a very dubious expression. "Look," she said, "I can get Dad's car." "It's faster this way," I lied. "Parking's tense up there." "Hey, it's safe. I won't tip it or anything." She let herself down reluctantly into the bow. I was glad she wasn't facing me. When her eyes were on me, I felt like diving in the river again from agony and joy. I pried the canoe away from the dock and started paddling upstream. There was an extra paddle in the bow, but Sheila made no move to pick it up. She took her shoes off and dangled her feet over the side. 10 minutes went by. "What kind of band?" she asked. "It's sort of like folk music. You'll like it." "Eric Caswell's going to be there. He strokes number 4. "No kidding?" I said. I had no idea what she meant. "What's that sound?" she said, pointing towards the shore. "Bass, that splashing sound." "Over there?" "Yeah, bass. They come into the shallows at night to chase frogs and moths and things. Big largemouths, Micropetrus salamandus," I added, showing off. "I think fishing's dumb," she said, making a face. "I mean, it's boring and all. Definitely dumb. Now, I've spent a great deal of time in the years since wondering why Shelia Mant should come down so hard on fishing. Was her father a fisherman? Her antipathy towards fishing nothing more than normal filial rebellion? Had she tried it once, a messy encounter with a worm? Doesn't matter. What does is that at that fragile moment in time, I would have given anything not to appear down in Sheila's severe and unforgiving eyes. She hadn't seen my equipment yet. What I should have done, of course, was push the canoe in closer to shore and carefully slide the rod into some branches where I could pick it up again in the morning. Failing that, I could have surreptitiously dumped the whole outfit overboard, written off $40 or so as love's tribute. What I actually did do was gently lean forward and slowly, ever so slowly, push the rod back through my legs toward the stern, where it would be less conspicuous. It must have been exactly what the bass was waiting for. Fish will trail a lure sometimes, trying to make up their mind whether or not to attack. And to the slight pause in the plug speed caused by my adjustment was tantalizing enough to overcome the bass's inhibitions. My rod, safely out of sight at last, bent double. The line, tightly coiled, peeled off the spool with a shrill, tearing zip of a high-speed drill. 4 things occurred to me at once. 1, that it was a bass. 2, that it was a big bass. 3, that it was the biggest bass I had ever hooked. And 4, that Shelia Mant must never know. "What was that?" she asked, turning half around. What was what?" That buzzing noise? Bats. She shuddered, quickly drew her feet back into the canoe. Every instinct I had told me to pick up the rod and strike back at the bass, but there was no need to. It was already solidly hooked. Downstream, an awesome distance downstream, it jumped clear of the water, landing with a concussion heavy enough to ripple the entire river. For a moment, I thought it was gone, but then the rod was bending again, the tip dancing into the water. Slowly, not making any motion that might alert Shelia, I reached down to tighten the drag. While all this was going on, Shelia had begun talking, and it was a few minutes before I was able to catch up with her train of thought. Went to a party there, these fraternity men. Catherine says I should get in there if I wanted to, but I'm thinking more UVM or Bennington, somewhere I can ski. The bass was slanting towards the rocks on the New Hampshire side by the ruins of Donaldson's bathhouse. It had to be an old bass. A young one probably wouldn't have known about the rocks there. I brought the canoe back to the middle of the river, hoping to head it off. That's neat, I mumbled. Skiing, yeah, I can see that. Eric says I had the figure to model, but I thought I should get an education first. I mean, it might be a while before I get started and all. I was thinking about getting my hair styled, more swept back. And Margaret? Like hers, only shorter. She hesitated. Are we going backwards? We were. I had managed to keep the bass in the middle of the river, away from the rocks, but it had plenty of room there, and for the first time a chance to fully exert its strength. I quickly computed the weight necessary to draw a fully loaded canoe backwards. The thought of it made me feel faint. I dug in deeper with my paddle. Reassured, Shelia began talking about something else. But all my attention was taken up now with the fish. I could feel its desperation as the water grew shallower. I could sense the extra strain on the line, the frantic way it cut back and forth in the water. I could visualize what it looked like, the gape of its mouth, the flared gills, and the thick, vertical tail. The bass couldn't have encountered many forces in its long life that it wasn't capable of handling, and the unrelenting tug at its mouth must have been a source of great puzzlement and mounting panic. Me? I had problems of my own. To get to Dixford, I had to paddle up a sluggish stream that came into the river beneath a covered bridge. There was a shallow sandbar at the mouth of this stream, weeds on one side, rocks on the other. Without doubt, this is where I would lose the fish. I have to be careful with my complexion. I tan, but in segments. I can't figure out if it's even worth it. I wouldn't even do it, probably. I saw Jackie Kennedy in Boston, and she wasn't tan at all. Taking a deep breath, I paddled as hard as I could for the middle, deepest part of the bar. I could have threaded the eye of a needle with the canoe, but the pull on the stern threw me off, and I overcompensated. The canoe veered left and scraped bottom. I pushed the paddle down and shoved. A moment of hesitation. A moment more. The canoe shot clear into the deeper water of the stream. I immediately looked down at the rod. It was bent in the same tight arc. Miraculously, the bass was still on. The moon was out now. It was low and full enough that its beam shone directly through on Shelia there ahead of me in the canoe, washing her in a creamy, luminous glow. I could see the lithe, easy shape of her figure. I could see the way her hair curled down off her shoulders, the proud, alert tilt of her head, and all these things were as a tug on my heart. Not just Shelia, but the aura she carried about her of parties and casual touchings and grace. Behind me, I could feel the strain of the bass, steadier now, growing weaker, and this was another tug on my heart. Not just the bass, but the beat of the river and the slant of the stars and the smell of the night. Until finally, it seemed I would be torn apart between longings, split in half. 20 yards ahead of us was the road, and once I pulled the canoe up on shore, the bass would be gone, irretrievably gone. If instead, I stood up, grabbed the rod, and started pumping, I would have it. As tired as the bass was, there was no chance it would get away. I reached down for the rod, hesitated, looked up to where Shelia was stretching herself lazily towards the sky, her small breasts rising beneath the soft fabric of her dress, and the tug was too much for me. Quicker than it takes to write it down, I pulled a penknife from my pocket and cut the line in half. With a sick, nauseous feeling in my stomach, I saw the rod unbend. My legs are sore, Sheila whined. Are we there yet? Through a superhuman effort of self-control, I was able to beach the canoe and help Sheila off. The rest of the night is much foggier. We walked to the fair. There was the smell of popcorn, the sound of guitars. I may have danced once or twice with her, but all I really remember is her coming over to me once the music was done to explain that she would be going home in Eric Caswell's Corvette. Okay, I mumbled. For the first time that night, she looked at me, really looked at me. You're a funny kid, you know that? Funny, different, dreamy, odd. How many times was I to hear that in the years to come, all spoken with the same quizzical, half-accusatory tone Sheila used then? Poor Sheila. Before the month was over, the spell she cast over me was gone, but the memory of that lost bass haunted me all summer and haunts me still. There would be other Shelia Mants in my life, other fish, and though I came close once or twice, it was these secret, hidden tuggings in the night that claimed me, and I never made the same mistake again. A Tree, a Rock, a Cloud by Carson McCullers. It was raining that morning and still very dark. When the boy reached the streetcar cafe, he had almost finished his route, and he went in for a cup of coffee. The place was an all-night cafe owned by a bitter and stingy man named Leo. After the raw, empty street, the cafe seemed friendly and bright. Along the counter there were a couple of soldiers, 3 spinners from the cotton mill, and in a corner a man who sat hunched over with his nose and half his face down in a beer mug. The boy wore a helmet such as aviators wear. When he went into the cafe, he unbuckled the chin strap and raised the right flap up over his pink little ear. Often as he drank his coffee, someone would speak to him in a friendly way. But this morning Leo did not look into his face, and none of the men were talking. He paid and was leaving when the voice called out to him, "Son? Hey, son." He turned back, and the man in the corner was crooking his finger and nodding to him. He had brought his face out of the beer mug, and he seemed suddenly very happy. The man was long and pale, with a big nose and faded orange hair. "Hey, son." The boy went toward him. He was an undersized boy of about 12, with one shoulder drawn higher than the other because of the weight of the paper sack. His face was shallow, freckled, and his eyes were round child eyes. "Yeah, mister?" The man laid one hand on the paper boy's shoulders, then grasped the boy's chin and turned his face slowly from one side to the other. The boy shrank back uneasily. "Say, what's the big idea?" The boy's voice was shrill. Inside the cafe, it was suddenly very quiet. The man said slowly, "I love you." All along the counter, the men laughed. The boy who had scowled and sidled away did not know what to do. He looked over the counter at Leo, and Leo watched him with a weary, brittle jeer. The boy tried to laugh also, but the man was serious and sad. "I do not mean to tease you, son," he said. "Sit down and have a beer with me. There's something I have to explain." Cautiously, out of the corner of his eye, the paper boy questioned the men along the counter to see what he should do, but they had gone back to their beer or their breakfast and did not notice him. Leo put a cup of coffee on the counter and a little jug of cream. "He is a miner," Leo said. The paper boy slid himself up onto the stool. His ear beneath the upturned flap of the helmet was very small and red. The man was nodding at him soberly. "It is important," he said. Then he reached in his hip pocket and brought out something which he held up in the palm of his hand for the boy to see. "Look very carefully," he said. The boy stared, but there was nothing to look at very carefully. The man held in his big, grimy palm a photograph. It was the face of a woman, but blurred, so that the only thing that you could see clearly was the hat and the dress that she was wearing. "See?" the man asked. The boy nodded, and the man placed another picture in his palm. The woman was standing on a beach in a bathing suit. The suit made her stomach very big, and that was the main thing you noticed. Got a good look? He leaned over closer and finally asked, You ever seen her before? The boy sat motionless, staring slantwise at the man. Not so I know of. Very well. The man blew on the photographs and put them back into his pocket. That was my wife. Dead? The boy asked. Slowly the man shook his head. He pursed his lips as though about to whistle and answered in a long drawn-out way. No, he said. I will explain. The beer on the counter before the man was in a large brown mug. He did not pick up the drink. Instead, he bent down and putting his face over the rim, he rested there for a moment. Then, with both hands, he tilted the mug and sipped. Some night you'll go to sleep with your big nose in a mug and drown, said Leo. Prominent transient drowns in beer. That'd be a cute death. The paperboy tried to signal to Leo. While the man was not looking, he screwed up his face and worked his mouth to question soundlessly. Drunk? But Leo only raised his eyebrows and turned away to put some pink strips of bacon on the grill. The man pushed the mug away, straightened himself, and folded his loose, crooked hands on the counter. His face was sad, and he looked at the paperboy. He did not blink, but from time to time, his lips closed down with delicate gravity over his pale green eyes. It was nearing dawn, and the boy shifted the weight of the paper sack. I am talking about love, the man said. With me, it is a science. The boy half slid down from the stool, but the man raised his forefinger, and there was something about him that held the boy and would not let him go away. 12 years ago, I married the woman in the photograph. She was my wife for 1 year, 9 months, 3 days, and 2 nights. I loved her. Yes. He tightened his blurred, rambling voice and said again, I loved her. I thought also that she loved me. I was a railroad engineer. She had all home comforts and luxuries. It never crept into my brain that she was not satisfied. But, do you know what happened? Yow! Said Leo. The man did not take his eyes away from the boy's face. She left me. I came in one night, and the house was empty, and she was gone. She left me. With a fella? The boy asked. Gently, the man placed the palm down on the counter. Why, naturally, son. A woman does not run off like that alone. The cafe was quiet. The soft rain blackened endless in the street outside. Leo pressed down the frying bacon with the prongs of a long fork. So you've been chasing the floozy around for 11 years, frazzled old rascal. For the first time, the man glanced at Leo. Please don't be vulgar. Besides, I'm not speaking to you. He turned back to the boy in a trusting and secretive undertone. Let's not pay any attention to him, okay? The paper boy nodded doubtfully. It was like this, the man continued. I am a person who feels many things. All of my life, one thing after another has impressed me. Moonlight, the leg of a pretty girl, one thing after another. But the point is that when I had enjoyed anything, there was a peculiar sensation, as though it was laying around loose in me. Nothing seemed to finish itself up or fit in with other things. Women, I had my portion of them. Same. Afterwards, laying around loose in me. I was a man who had never loved. Very slowly, he closed his eyelids, and the gesture was like a curtain drawn at the end of a scene in a play. When he spoke again, his voice was excited, and the words came fast. The lobes of his large, loose ears seemed to tremble. Then I met this woman. I was 51 years old, and she always said she was 30. I met her at a filling station, and we were married within 3 days. And do you know what it was like? I just can't tell you. All I had ever felt was gathered together around this woman. Nothing lay loose in me any more, but was finished up by her. The man stopped suddenly and stroked his long nose. His voice sank down to a steady and reproachful undertone. I'm not explaining this right. What happened was this. There were these beautiful feelings and loose little pleasures inside me, and this woman was something like an assembly line for my soul. I run these little pieces of myself through her, and I come out complete. Now do you follow me? What was her name? The boy asked. Oh, he said. I called her Dodo, but that is immaterial. Did you try to make her come back? The man did not seem to hear. Under the circumstances, you can imagine how I felt when she left me. Leo took a bacon off the grill and folded 2 strips of it between his bun. He had a gray face with slitted eyes and a pinched nose saddled by faint blue shadows. One of the mill workers signaled for more coffee, and Leo poured it. He did not give refills on coffee free. The spinner ate breakfast there every morning, but the better Leo knew his customers, the stingier he treated them. He nibbled his own bun as though he grudged it to himself. And you never got a hold of her again? The boy did not know what to think of the man, and his child's face was uncertain, with mingled curiosity and doubt. He was new on the paper route. It was still strange for him to be out on the town in the black, queer, early morning. Yes, the man said. I took a number of steps to get her back. I went around trying to locate her. I went to Tulsa where she had folks, and Mobile. I went to every town she had ever mentioned to me, and I hunted down every man she had formerly been connected with. Tulsa, Atlanta, Chicago, Chehaw, Memphis. For the better part of 2 years, I chased around the country trying to lay hold of her. But the pair of them had vanished from the face of the earth, said Leo. Don't listen to him, the man said confidentially. And also just forget those 2 years. They are not important. What matters is that around the 3rd year, a curious thing began to happen to me. What? The boy asked. The man leaned down and tilted his mug to take a sip of beer. But as he hovered over the mug, his nostrils fluttered slightly. He sniffed the stillness of the bread and did not drink. Love is a curious thing to begin with. At first, I thought only of getting her back. It was a kind of mania. But then, as time went on, I tried to remember her. Do you know what happened? No, the boy said. When I laid myself down on the bed and tried to think about her, my mind became a blank. I couldn't see her. I couldn't take her pictures and look. No good. Nothing doing. A blank. Can you imagine? Say, Mac, Leo called down the counter. Can you imagine this bozo's mind a blank? Slowly, as though fanning away flies, the man waved his hand. His green eyes were concentrated and fixed on the shallow little face of the paper boy. But a sudden piece of glass on a sidewalk, or a nickel tune in a music box, a shadow on a wall at night, and I'd remember. Might happen in a street, and I would cry and bang my head against a lamppost. You follow me? A piece of glass, the boy said. Anything. I would walk around and I had no power of how and when to remember her face. You think you could put up a kind of shield, but remembering don't come to a man face forward. It corners around sideways. I was at the mercy of everything I saw and heard. Suddenly, inside of me, combing the countryside, to find her, she began to chase me around in my very soul. She chasing me, mind you, and my soul. The boy asked finally, what part of the country were you in then? Oh, the man groaned, I was a sick mortal. It was like smallpox. I confess, son, I boozed, I fornicated, I committed any sin that suddenly appealed to me. I am loath to confess it, but I will do so. When I recall that period, it is all curdled in my mind. It was so terrible. The man leaned his head down and tapped his forehead on the counter. For a few seconds he stayed bowed over in this position, the back of his stringy neck covered with orange furs. His hands with their long, warped fingers held palm to palm in an attitude of prayer. Then the man straightened himself. He was smiling, and suddenly his face was bright and tremulous and old. "It was in the 5th year that it happened," he said, "and with it I started my science." Leo's mouth jerked with a pale, quick grin. "Well, none of we boys are getting any younger," he said. Then, with a sudden anger, he balled up a dishcloth he was holding and threw it hard on the floor. "You draggle-tailed old Romeo!" "What happened?" the boy asked. The old man's voice was high and clear. "Peace," he answered. "Huh?" "It is hard to explain scientifically, son," he said. "I guess the logical explanation is that she and I had fled from each other for so long. Finally, we just got tangled up together, lay down and quit. Peace." A queer and beautiful blankness. It was spring in Portland, and the rain came every afternoon. All evening, I just stayed there on my bed in the dark. That's how the science came to me. The windows in the streetcar were pale blue with light. The 2 soldiers paid for their beers and opened the door. One of the soldiers combed his hair and wiped off his muddy puttees before he went outside. The 3 mill workers bent silently over their breakfasts. Leo's clock was ticking on the wall. "It is this, and listen carefully. I meditated on love and reasoned it out. I realized what is wrong with us. Men fall in love for the first time. What do they fall in love with?" The boy's soft mouth was partly open, and he did not answer. "A woman," the old man said. "Without science, with nothing to go by, they undertake the most dangerous and sacred experience in God's earth. They fall in love with a woman. Is that correct, son?" "Yeah," the boy said faintly. "They start at the wrong end of love. They begin at the climax. Can you wonder it is so miserable? Do you know how men should love?" The old man reached over and grasped the boy by the collar of his leather jacket. He gave him a gentle little shake, and his green eyes gazed down, unblinking and grave. "Son, do you know how love should be begun?" The boy sat small and listening and still. Slowly he shook his head. The old man leaned closer and whispered, "A tree, a rock, a cloud." It was still raining outside the cafe. Mild, gray, endless rain. The mill whistle blew for the 6 o'clock shift, and the 3 spinners paid and went away. There was no one in the cafe but Leo, the old man, and the little boy. "The weather was like this in Portland," he said. "At the time my science was begun. I meditated and I started very cautious. I would pick up something from the street and take it home with me. I bought a cat goldfish, and I concentrated on that goldfish, and I loved it. I graduated from one thing to another. Day by day, I was getting this technique. On the road from Portland to San Diego—" "Oh, shut up!" screamed Leo suddenly. "Shut up! Shut up!" The old man still held the collar of the boy's jacket. He was trembling, and his face was earnest and bright and wild. "For 6 years now, I've gone around by myself and built up my science. Now, I'm a master. Son, I can love anything. No longer do I have to think about it even. I see a street full of people, and a beautiful light comes in me. I watch a bird in the sky, or I meet a traveler on the road. Everything, son, and anybody. All strangers and all loved. Do you realize what a science like mine can mean?" The boy held himself stiffly. His hands curled tight around the counter edge. Finally he answered, "Did you ever really find that lady?" What? Say what, son? I mean, the boy said timidly, have you fallen in love with a woman again? The old man loosened his grasp on the boy's collar. He turned away, and for the first time his green eyes had a vague and scattered look. He lifted the mug from the counter, and drank down the yellow beer. His head was shaking slowly from side to side. And finally, he answered, no, son. You see, as the last step in my science, I go cautious, and I'm not quite ready yet. Well, said Leo. Well, well, well. The old man stood in the open doorway. Remember, he said, framed there in the damp, dark light of the early morning. He looked shrunken and seedy and frail, but his smile was bright. Remember, I love you, he said with a last nod, and the door closed quietly behind him. The boy did not speak for a long time. He pulled down the bangs on his forehead and slid a grimy little forefinger around the rim of his empty cup. Then, without looking at Leo, he finally asked, was he drunk? No, said Leo shortly. The boy raised his clear voice higher. Then was he a dope fiend? No. The boy looked up at Leo, and his flat little voice was desperate. His voice was urgent and shrill. Was he crazy? Do you think he was a lunatic? The boy's voice dropped suddenly without doubt. Leo, or not? But Leo would not answer him. Leo had run a night cafe for 14 years, and he held himself to be a critic of craziness. There were town characters and also the transients who roamed in from the night. He knew the manias of all of them, but he did not want to satisfy the questions of the waiting child. He tightened his pale face and was silent. So the boy pulled down the right flap of his helmet, and as he turned to leave, he made the only comment that seemed safe to him, the only remark that could not be laughed down and despised. He sure has done a lot of traveling. The end. Thank you, everyone, for listening to our stories today. I hope you enjoyed them. If you enjoyed today's readings, remember on the first and third Thursdays of each month, that means our next Word of Mouth is going to be on July 2nd at 12:10 p.m. Central Time. For that, we'll be reading Wildfire in Manhattan by Joanne Harris. I hope you'll join us then.
Got up